First, let's look at Psalm 1:1 with all the Masoretic accents included. So we have the vowels and the accents. And this is why it's important to learn the vowel symbols very well, because we need to be able to distinguish between the Masoretic accents and the vowels. So let's take a look at the accents here. So here's Psalm 1:1. Here's the first word. We have an accent there. This little vertical line is an accent. This is followed by a seraiode and then a comets. Up above the word here, there's an accent. Come over to a share, there is an accent there. And we'll come over, here's one here under low, and then up here on top of halach, we see another accent. And here in ba'atzat, we see an accent here. Coming down to the bottom of the next line, we have a combined accent. This is combined with the one below it. That's actually, it's an unusual, it happens in the Psalms, where we have an accent that's made up of two separate marks. And then we have an accent here. This is indicating that this syllable is accented. So we have uvaderek. Here we have a Masoretic mark, but it's called prepositive. It's actually coming before the word. And so it's not marking the tone syllable or the accented syllable of the word. That's actually over here, chataim. Here's another accent. And then here we have an accent called the atnach. That is like a period or a semicolon. Come over here, we have an accent there. We'll come down to the bottom line. Here's another prepositive accent, and then here is an accent mark. Here's a Masoretic accent, and then finally on the last word we have this vertical line which indicates that we're in the last word of the verse, and then we have this double mark here, and that indicates that we're at the end of a verse. So all of those Masoretic accent marks are not vowels, and we need to be careful that we distinguish between them and our vowel. Okay, let's take a look at the vowels in Psalm 1. So here's our first word, ashrei, and the aleph has a patach. Then under the sheen we have a shawah, but it's a silent shawah. We have a short vowel coming before it, and it's an unaccented syllable. Our next vowel is this vowel letter. It's got two parts. It's got the sere, and then it's got a yod, and it's a vowel letter called a seraiode. So that is one vowel for the resh. It's a re. It's an A sound. We come to our second word. We have the hey. It's got a comets, and then we have a hirik yod. Again, that's made of two parts. And this dot here is part of the sheen, so it's not a vowel at all. So this is ha'ish. Then we have esher. This is a half vowel here, and it's called a hatif patach. And then next to it we have a sagol, and that is a short E-class vowel. It's just a short vowel, but it's a full vowel. So we have esher. Then for lo, we have the vowel showing up here. Interestingly, normally that vowel would appear at the left side of this letter, but because this lamed has this long tail sticking up out of it, the holum, which is what this vowel is moved over to the right side of the next letter. So this vowel actually goes with the lamed, but it's written over the right side of the aleph, which is the next letter, just for convenience sake. So that's lo. Then we have halach, and so we have the hey. This is a comets, and under the lamed we have a patach. Here at the end of this word we have a silent schwa, and that's put there for a final calf to differentiate it from a dalet. Notice over here I have a dalet, and the dalet does not come down below the line, but it looks a lot like this final calf over here. This comes down below the line. But to differentiate between those two, a silent schwa is put here, and it actually shows up above the line. So that's just a convention. So we have halach. Our next word here is ba'atzat. And so we have the bait, we have a patach. The ayin, we have a reduced vowel, hatef patach. And then the tzadeh, we have a patach. So we have ba'atzat. Coming down to the next line, we have rishaim. So we have the resh has a vocal schwa. It comes at the beginning of a word, so it's always going to be a vocal schwa at the beginning of a word. Then we have the sheen has a comets. And now we have another combination vowel here, a vowel letter made up of a hirik and a yod, so it's called a hirik yod. And then our final meme. Now here we have a case where we have a shurek. This is a vowel, technically a vowel letter, but it begins a word. It's the only place where we begin a word with a vowel, and it just happens to be the wow sometimes reduces from a consonant to a vowel in certain situations. It's not rare, but it's the only case where this wow reduces to a shurek. So there's a vowel, and then it comes before v'derek. So we have a vocal schwa, v, and then we have, under the dalet, we have a segol, and under the resh, we have a segol. This symbol here is an accent, and it's telling us that this syllable is the accented syllable rather than the last syllable. So we have uvaderek. So that's one benefit of these Masoretic accents, is they indicate accenting in pronunciation. Not every Masoretic accent gives us a pronunciation accent, but oftentimes they do. Okay, moving on to the next word, we have the chet has a patach. This tet, which has a dagesh forte in it, which we'll come back to, has a comets. Then the aleph has a hirik yod, that vowel letter. It's one vowel. Here we see lo again with that holum. Then we have amad. So we have the comets and the comets, amad. Here's another shurek. That's a vowel even though it's coming at the beginning of a word. The only case where we have a vowel coming at the beginning of a word. And then we have the bait has a vocal schwa, b. The meme has a holum wow, or sometimes called a holum vav. And so that's mo, and then the sheen has a patak. So we have uve moshav. Coming down to the third line, we have the lamed has a tsere. The tzadeh has a hirik yod, one vowel. Here we see lo again with that holum that's off to the left of the letter. And then we have our final word, yashav, which a yod has a comets, and the sheen also has a comets. Let's go ahead and divide the syllables now. So our first word here, ashrei, and our first letter is the aleph and the patak, and then the second letter has a silent schwa, and so that's closing off the syllable. That means we're going to divide after it. So that sheen closes off this closed syllable, which is consonant, vowel, consonant. That's a closed syllable. We know it is a silent schwa because it comes after a short vowel, which is a patach. Then our next syllable is this resh with the seriod. That comes at the end of the word, so we don't need to divide there. Then we have our second word here is ha'ish. So we have the he and the comets. The second letter is the aleph, but it's got its own vowel. So we divide before it because this aleph has its own vowel, and so it is starting its own syllable. The second syllable here is ish. The hierarchy is the vowel, and when we have consonant, vowel, consonant, that's consonant, vowel, consonant, so that's a closed syllable by definition, just as the first syllable here is consonant, vowel, so that's an open syllable. Okay, let's come over here to a share. So we have the aleph and we have a reduced vowel, hataf patach. The next letter, the next consonant, has its own vowel, so we divide before it, and then share is a closed syllable, but it ends the word. We don't need to do anything else. Here we have lo, it's a one-syllable word. We do not need to divide a one-syllable word. Here we have halach, so we have the hey and the comets. The next letter is a lamed, and it's got its own vowel, so we divide before it, halach. Now this next one we have ba'atzat, so the bait has a patach. The next letter has its own vowel, a hatef patach, so we divide before it. Then we come to this ayin. It's got a half vowel, and then the next letter, the tzadeh, has its own vowel, so we divide before it. And finally, the final syllable is a closed syllable, and we're done. Coming down to the second line here, we have rishaim. So the resh has a vocal schwa. The next letter has its own vowel, so we divide before it. Then we look at the sheen. The next letter has its own vowel, this ayin, so we divide before it. And then the last syllable is im. It's a closed syllable. We're done with that word. Now we have this shurek, which is the only case where a vowel begins a word, and we'll actually divide after it. This is a vocal schwa. It's beginning a syllable, and so it's a vocal schwa. And so we have u, v. The next letter, the dalet, has its own vowel, so we divide before it. Then dalet, resh. The resh has its own vowel, so we divide before it. And then we're done. Rech is the last syllable. This next word, chataim, requires a little bit more explanation. Let's jump over here and look at this word, chataim. So notice that it has a dagesh forte. And that's that dot in the middle of the letter right there. That's a dagesh forte. And what that is the equivalent of is doubling that letter. So I've got this asterisk here to show that this would never be a real Hebrew word. What the dagesh forte is doing is it's the equivalent of, this letter is a tet, so we have a tet with a silent schwa, and then we have another tet, and it has the vowel, in this case a comets. And so we have a closed syllable here, chat, silent schwa, and then we have the tet beginning another syllable. In this case, ta is a syllable, and then the final syllable is im. So if we were going to divide this, it would look like this down here. We would be dividing it with just a straight line between those two letters, but we don't have those two letters. We only have this one letter with a dot in the middle. So if I'm drawing it, I could come down here and wrap around that dot and then come down like that. That would be the way to divide that. But if I'm doing it with a keyboard, then I'll come back up here and simply divide before the letter, and then in this case it begins a new syllable, and then divide after the letter. But I'm aware of the fact that this Dagesh forte is actually indicating a closed syllable, even though it doesn't look like it if I don't pay attention to the Dagesh forte. Okay, let's come back now. So I'm back here looking at my word hata'im, and so the chet and the patak, now I see the Dagesh forte, and so I'd like to do this, but for simplicity's sake I'll just divide before the letter, and then notice the aleph has its own vowel, so I'll divide before that, and then I'm done with that word. Lo, one syllable word. And then we have amad, so we have first letter vowel, second letter, it's got its own vowel, so we divide before it, and then the word ends. This is similar to before. We divide after that initial shurek, and then this is always going to be a vocal schwa. So then we go to the next letter. It's got its own vowel, so we divide before it because it's beginning its own syllable. And then we come to the next letter, the sheen here. It's got its own vowel, so we divide before it, and then we're at the end of the word. So we have u, vi, mo, shav. Now let's come down to the final line here, and we have leitzim. So we have the lay, we come to the next letter, the sade. It's got its own vowel. It's got a hirakiot. So we divide before that sade. And then we're done. Lo is a one syllable word. We don't have to worry about it. And then we have yashav. So we have ya, and then the sheen has its own vowel. So we divide before it. And then shav, that is a closed syllable. So we're done with Psalm 1:1. Let's take a look at this word here in the end of verse 3. It is yatzliach. Yatzliach. Notice first of all that the first syllable is unaccented and it has a short vowel, so it's a closed syllable. So we'll divide after the syllable divider. A closed syllable will end with a syllable divider in the middle of a word. So we have yatz, then we have the lamed has a hirik yod. And then notice here we've got a patak with that chet. Actually, in some places, for instance in accordance, the patak doesn't show up exactly the way it's supposed to. Technically, the patak is supposed to be a little bit set to the right, and it's indicating a pronunciation of liach. Since gutturals don't like other vowels besides A-class vowels, the Hebrews didn't like to say lich. It was easier to say liach. And so this little, what's called a furtive patach, so it's furtive in that it gives a little bit of pronunciation. And so that furtive patach is there, but it doesn't affect the syllables. So it's yatz, liach, 2 syllables. Yatz number 1, liach number 2. And that is still a closed syllable.